love that? All the voices people hear when they walk around on the streets are probably our friends.
I've run into that in a couple of movies at this point, where I'm then like sending a note to people afterward going, so was the project you couldn't talk to me about 6 months ago, did it happen to be for this studio? And you get the little, little sheepish response, yes.
Yeah.
Trying to
I've had
figure
that
it
in
out.
sitcoms over here when I was doing the sitcom kind of
Mhm.
circuit over here. I would like put the TV on and be like, wait a minute, I know you. Unlike Emmerdale.
Right, right, right.
Hello, everyone. Shining, happy, smiley faces. We are not ignoring you. I knew you were
Yeah,
here.
you're all there. I got another question to ask you before we go on into the other thing, because you're reminding me of the whole US UK thing. So
Okay.
what's the name of the UK site that's basically the IMDb alternative, the thing over there that kind of shows who you
Spotlight.
are? It's Spotlight. I can keep
Spotlight.
forgetting it's called Spotlight.
And you
You
have to
do
be
know,
on Spotlight. Like
right,
you don't get jobs if you're not on Spotlight.
right. You do know that even Radio 4 for the afternoon play at this point is now hiring through Spotlight. Like they
Yeah.
gave up their whole own internal system to just buy in the Spotlight. I found that amazing.
Oh, that's because I let my membership expire.
Well, that might be a reason to renew it, because some people we know have gone back over to the UK to produce some more fun stuff.
Wow, I might need to see if they'll have me back. Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Gosh, the people, you are our most popular guest, Stephen. You always have so many people and so many people watching me. Which brings me to, I was telling you all, no introductions are needed. This is Stephen J. Cohen. We all know him. We all love him. Straight
Aw,
to our living rooms.
aw.
Um,
Sorry.
and I was telling Stephen that we had, funny enough, I did have quite a few kind of public domain questions. I hope you don't
Hmm.
mind. I happen to
Oh,
have known
never.
the
That's okay.
answers.
Yeah.
I already answered them.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, but they were like things that I've already asked you a million times. So I
Mm,
kind of knew. So basically, I have an ulterior motive here. The last time, and we will ask maybe some of those questions towards
sure.
the end of the call, but it's occurred to me that Stephen is everyone's kind of mentor, and Stephen is always helping us and giving us public domain advice and talking about spoken realms, and the first person to help with our sound. And but I don't know too many deep and dirty, dark secrets of Stephen's. And Stephen, the
Oh,
narrator, Stephen, the actor, what Stephen's dark moments of the soul kind of thing. So
oh
I
my.
kind of want to
Okay.
ask you, how
Sure.
did this all begin?
Okay. Well, here, I'm getting a little distracted by all the people popping up on the other side.
Yeah,
How did it all
ignore
begin?
them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, because now I'm seeing, well, what's weird is I'm in here on the Linux version. I know the layout is a little bit different. And so I see a big Daniela, but I then see a row of little faces now
Yeah,
across the
that's what
top.
I see as well. And
Okay.
actually, we are on speaker, yes.
Yeah.
And I was kidding, of course, guys, when I said ignore them, except I will never forget the time, and shout out to Andrea Ems,
Yeah.
who, a fellow Gemini, anytime somebody would do something on the screen, and I
Mhm.
remember somebody's cat walked by, and Andrea was like, oh, kitty! And I was like,
Yeah.
let's focus.
Well,
Okay.
that's part of the reason I'm in the booth, because otherwise, we get Dinah will walk by the screen all the time.
Yes, background entertainment. I love it. I love it
Exactly.
when
Or
people's
in her
kids
case,
and everything.
foreground entertainment, because she'll just sort of like the tail will go and she'll go across between me and the thing. We're going, all right, this will
But
be
those are the
fun.
memorable calls. Byron had his mom on, and she
Mm.
kept kind of like, are we on? Are we here?
Oh, I
Those
love
are,
that.
those are I think, and the whole Corona thing last
Hmm.
year, getting
Hmm.
to see all the like journalists and everything in their living rooms with their kids running and screaming. And
Oh, it was really fun. So
yeah,
you talk about the tech advice thing. So audiobooks changed my social media. And I don't just mean that. So Twitter responds to who you interact with. And early on, I did a Fourth Amendment audiobook,
mhm.
and written by, at that time, he was a journalist for a tech news site. Now he works for NBC. But I, like the day after it came out, I got an email from a name that I recognized because I had just pronounced his name in the book. But I'm like, how did he find me? And it says, hi, I hope you don't think I'm stalking you. I'm an investigative journalist, not only by occupation, but by nature. And I had no idea they were making an audiobook. So the second I saw your name, I had to figure out who you were. I hope you enjoyed reading the book. And like we then had this conversation back and forth. So then we started interacting on Twitter. But once we did, Twitter started realizing, and this links back to your where everything started, realizing that I've got a whole bunch of people from public radio and Symphony Space and WNYC in New York who I'm directly connected to for one reason or another. So how this links back to your thing was when a lot of those people were recording from home, a few of them said, okay, voice actors, I know you guys do this all the time, but I am not on location in Bahrain.
Yeah.
I'm in my house. Help me set up something, right? So we were going back and forth. So I wound up doing that for a couple of the people who are
For the
setting up.
journalists.
Yeah, for the
That's
journalists,
so
because
cool.
right, because it's different when you're doing 2 minutes underneath a duvet in a hotel room, right?
Yeah.
Versus, okay, we're now going to do the whole hour-long show from my house. How do I do this?
They
kind of a
looked
deal.
horrified. They were so
Yeah.
uncomfortable. These are people that you're used to seeing their faces all the time. And they were
Yeah.
just like headlights.
Oh my God, yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was a lot of fun. But what had connected me to them was actually audiobooks, because once Rusvaravar and I were connected, suddenly it goes, do you know Rachel Martin? Do you know, these people from Symphony Space? Do you know? And then occasionally people were going, wait a minute, I do know you. Right. So we were then having this thing back and forth with like Manusha Zamarodi and Jen Poyant and these other people from NYC. We're going, wait a minute, we do know each other. I'm like, yes, we do. So it was this weird kind of background thing. So what you were talking about, what's the deep, how did Stephen get to where he is?
But Stephen, do you not think, because I've got to say that I know everyone's excited about hugging everyone. I had my second vaccine today. Yay. It's all great. It's wonderful. Real life. Yay. We get to go back to real life. I will miss this year because I feel like, don't hug Daniela. Thanks, Jennifer. You know me well. I feel like the world became smaller this year because we were all in one room, and I love it. I'm profoundly grateful for the people that I connected with.
Yeah.
I've never connected with so many people in my life. I'm not a connector. I'm kind of I like a lot of strangers and then I get on with my life, but I feel so close to so many people that it never would have happened if it weren't for Corona. And I think so many people have, like you with the journalists, we've built bridges. That's something that's going to go on for the rest of your life. You're not going to just dump those people now that you go outside.
Absolutely. And what you're making me think of when you're talking about like that reaction to the to the realities of this last year is, and it was another narrator pointed this out. They were trying to explain what they felt the difference was between an extroverted introvert and introverted extrovert. And I keep feeling like that, whatever that line is, those two terms actually probably describe audiobook narrators in general very well. Either you are a person who, you're a person who likes this really small thing, but then you have this energy to explode outward, but you need to retreat to that small space, right? So you've got, so it's somewhere along that line that lives in the middle, I think, is why we like performing in the little box.
Yeah, I had an epiphany about that. That's for another talk. But I want to know, I'm not talking about how it started recently.
No.
I want to know when you were in school or when you were young, what was the first kind of, when you first became Stephen?
Yeah.
The Stephen that we know now, what built that?
What were the whole little weird pieces that all came together? So a lot of people's earliest memories of me involve performance of one kind or another. But my family was not very supportive of me going into this as a profession, very much so. It was, this just 100% honesty about this. My family did not show up for any I mean, once I broke 12, the fact that I kept doing things that were performance oriented after that, there was no familial support in doing that at all.
Do you remember what sparked your interest the very first time in this?
No, because I've seen early tapes and things, and I was really young and really precocious, so I was that very well-spoken kid,
I can
right?
see
You
that.
know, and I'm the elder of two, but the behavior was very much only child behavior. The whole, like, you know, you get from the camp counselors and stuff, how do you talk to people your own age? Kind of a response from them, because you're having these conversations with them, and they're, you know, they're a good few years older than you, and they feel like they're talking to somebody who's a mental peer. You kind of get this thing. So it's that precocious kid thing,
Yeah.
combined with performing from, you know, below the age of 5. And family kind of realizing, wait a minute, if we support this, he's going to do this for a living, and that's scary as all get.
Yeah, he's not going to become
out.
an accountant.
Right. So, you know, so I went off to college. Basically, no, let's move back a little bit more. So in high school, I went to high school with, well, you know, you probably know the names. I went to Midwood High School in the middle of Brooklyn. I'm Brooklyn born and raised. And 1 year younger than me is Noah Baumbach, the director.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So Marriage Story. Him.
Oh, with what's his face? The girl's guy that's so like, yes, you can't stop staring at him, anything he's in.
Right.
I can't remember.
Adam Driver.
With names.
Adam Driver.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. He's like, right. There's something about him. You just can't.
Yeah. And we had this school, each of the classes wrote their own faux musical and performed them together. And I actually was behind the camera. I was recording the whole thing. So weirdly, I feel like I may have been his first cameraman, because whereas the other people just didn't care, you know, you just set up and did the shot. He actually came over and said, okay, so this scene is going to have this over here. You're going to want to make sure you get this over there. Like he went through the whole thing, and we're talking high school kid, right? So Noah totally was, and it wasn't just all about him. Right. Even though he was kind of like he was sort of the Mel Brooks, the guy with the lines. It was going, you know, the funny things were going to be there, but he would point out, you're going to want to get this person's reaction shot and things like that.
So, he was who he is.
Yeah, very much so.
He was.
Yeah, very much so. And so the path was Midwood High School to Brooklyn College to NYU. I tried leaving New York. I went upstate to a nice little town, but being a New Yorker, I didn't drive a car at that point. And I didn't have an experience of someplace as small as Oswego, which was an hour north of Syracuse. I keep thinking if it was closer to Syracuse, I might have stayed, because there would have been something that felt like a city. But one semester at a place like that was just too much for me at that point.
And the lack of support. So
yeah,
did you feel that maybe they were right? And do you feel that it made it harder, or did you feel, no, they're completely wrong, and more determined to do what you wanted to do?
Weirdly, it was both. So what happened was, I knew that that performing felt good, but right. I also knew that academically I could have done many different things, you know, and there was the whole, you know, my son the doctor, my son the lawyer kind of pressure things going on. But when I went to undergrad, initially I was not taking theater courses. I was taking creative writing courses, but also the sciences and everything. I had no idea if I was going to wind up in law school or whatever. And I wound up starting at Oswego, realizing that I couldn't be in that kind of a place. Was worried that if I stopped going to college, I wouldn't go back. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I was worried if I had a gap and started to work, that was going to be it.
So the weight of everyone's dreams.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that was sort of where that was. And I came back to New York, didn't know where I wanted to go, wound up enrolling at Brooklyn College. And while I was at Brooklyn College, I'll just name 3 people who were on staff at a school that who I got to take classes with, which are part of the reason why Brooklyn College to this day is sometimes referred to as poor man's Harvard, I got to study with F. Murray Abraham, Yitzhak Perlman, and Allen Ginsberg.
I remember when I very first met you,
Yeah.
that's the minute I liked you. I liked you, obviously, before your reputation precedes you. But I mentioned Ginsberg, and you said, oh, I got to study with him. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a crazy person to take classes from. So his classes always filled up, and he would just keep issuing overtallies, even though he would reach room limits.
Wow.
So he would just keep telling, yes, you can come. And like he would somehow get a hold of them, even when the department didn't want him to have them. He would like get hold of the forms and just keep having people come in. So they kept needing to give him bigger rooms. And we're talking the 80s at that point. So he's not a young man then.
Yeah.
You know. But during my time there, I got to study with all three of them. In fact, Murray, that was just when he had started to teach. And what was the really interesting thing about studying with F. Murray Abraham at that point was he was an incredibly accomplished actor, but he hadn't learned how to teach what he knew. So he was very likely in those first couple of semesters to get very frustrated, stop you in a scene, not know what to say to you, basically tap you out or tap the scene partner out, do something, and then step back out, because he didn't have the vocabulary to teach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I feel like that was, at that point, the most informative thing was that understanding that you can have an understanding, but not be able to communicate it. That was a very interesting graphic moment to sort of see that happen there.
That's you know what, that you just drew a parallel, and I'm not going to let us get too off track, because I was having a conversation after the Thursday call with someone, because I often have somebody will ask a question and I know the answer, and I know it on such a deep level. I want to explain it to them, but I have had feedback that I'm in people's face. I'm very aggressive when I help them, but it's because there's no connection, because I don't know how to, I'm trying to like download my brain, but I don't know how to help them. That's why I'm not a coach. I don't know how to speak in a way other people are going to take it in. I can only like blurt it out. So that's what you said. So did you find that made it more difficult for you to learn from him, or easier? Because
I feel like I learned different things from him than I would have learned from him later on, because I saw his classes later on once he developed a teaching style, but I just happened to be there at the very beginning. What was interesting though for me was, as opposed to the BFA program actors, for a very short window, Brooklyn College had a BFA directing program.
did you?
Well, that was my focus at that point.
Wow.
And basically there were so few people who were in that program, they phased it out while I was there and said, you can get a BA with honors. And I wound up taking courses with the MFA directing students.
Wow.
At that point. Okay. So that was what I was doing. So it was really interesting for me to kind of have my directing mentor, the person running the directing program, say, okay, so these are the art classes I want you to take. These are the sciences. These are the other things. And I would take stuff in different departments, because he wanted, either he was doing research on a play that he was producing, and we wanted to have those kinds of conversations, or he was looking at the stuff that I was doing and he was trying to help inform my aesthetic.
But so you've always, because I can't peg you as to what your true love is. I can't say you love to narrate. You're more the IT person. You've always been all of it.
Right. Well, even back then, I was splitting my time. So it's that directorial brain. So I was splitting my time. I was doing the directing stuff, the acting pieces. The directing would be the focus, but it meant I took lighting and sound design classes, and set design and costume design, So I took those things in order to be able to have enough of an understanding that I could have the conversation with the specialists in those areas.
But you're interested in it all as well. I mean, I did lighting and design in school, but I couldn't care less about it. I did it because you're supposed to do it. I wanted to act. You seem like you equally
I enjoy
care.
acting.
Yeah.
I enjoy the acting. It's serving the story is the ultimate thing that I'm trying to do in any.
You enjoy everything.
yeah, it's building the story from the outside as well as being on the inside. I mean, before I was taking any of the acting classes, it was all creative writing. So, I mean,
Wow.
I was building story on paper and then found my way back into the theater department, not realizing that was where I was going to stay. Um, and whereas other people, once they graduated, one sec.
And I gotta say, Harry says Renaissance man. And I think then that's the word that, yeah, I think you might be right about that.
Well, the word that I'm still looking for is, if you do this and you work in movies, they call you a filmmaker, right?
Hmm.
Right. There is no word for an audio filmmaker that that is a modern word. There are, auteur, whatever, you can come up with things, but there's no modern equivalent of filmmaker. Filmmaker with no cameras, lots of microphones, no cameras.
I think mad genius.
Here we go, mad genius works. But where I was going was, whereas when most people graduated, you'd have your day job, you'd wait tables, you'd tend bar, you'd drive a cab. I drove a cab for one day in New York,
And
one
you
day.
didn't like it? You
I
killed someone by accident?
No, I got back at the end of the shift. I handed in everything, and I was like, so when you have to own a medallion at that point, there's no Uber. This is back when you and I were, right? So if you don't own a medallion, you go in, you apply, you do all the stuff, and then you're
What's a
basically, a
medallion?
medallion is that thing that you see on the hood of a New York City cab that says
Oh.
this is a legal cab, as opposed to somebody who's just driving their car around and will take your money.
Okay.
So it was an honest to goodness cab company, and I went through the training thing. I went out for one day. At the end of it, I came back in and said, I can't do this. And the guy behind the thing, when he took it, he said, I'm surprised you didn't, clock out early and come in. I said, I didn't know I could do that. I thought I had to stay out for the entire time. It's like New York City traffic, because there's all this vehemence towards cab drivers in general,
Yeah.
especially in the 90s, especially in the 80s and 90s. So when you're doing that, I was like going, yep, if I did something stupid, it's one thing, but if a different cabbie, ticked them off 10 blocks ago, and then they see me and then I get cut off, it's because they're just taking it on to the next cab they see.
I mean, you can easily say, well, it could be a great character study for my work,
right.
But really you're going to end up cleaning up vomit a lot.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So there was a lot of, so realizing that none of those things work for me, and I liked doing lighting and sound. My day job wound up being in the theater as well. So I would work backstage on most of the theaters on Theater Row, eventually worked my way uptown to Symphony Space, where Selected Shorts is recorded for NPR.
And did you never feel like worried that like, okay, now I'm going to become the lighting guy. What about me as the actor? Do you not have that actor ego? Not that I'm saying I would feel that way or anyone.
So, right. So I didn't look at it that way. I looked at it as I was spending 24/7 in the theater, as opposed to people who were spending time at an office job or spending time here or there. I mean, basically, if you've got an audition and your day job is in the theater, it was much easier to say, look, I will come in earlier and reset the stuff for the next show. I've got to go do this audition for Henson and Associates uptown, and you kind of like get this whole.
It's amazing how simple it is if you don't lug around the ego bit, isn't it? I would just get on with the job and not even think that way.
Right, because what was really happening was they were much more understanding, I think, because they were in the business. So for me to say, there was this audition here or that audition there, as long as my work was done and everything was all set up, it was totally fine. If I stayed late after the matinee to set up for the evening show, because I was then going to go and do this audition and then come back, 10 minutes before my call.
Yeah.
That was much easier to explain to them than I found doing that with anyone else. And it was fine until my mother figured out I was not employed by the theater, but I was employed by the show, which meant every time a show closed, I was going to be unemployed. So I got a really heartfelt, honest call from my mother going, I'm having a hard time sleeping because I keep thinking that you're going to have a hard time finding a job and you're not going to be able to pay your rent. Do me a favor. Get your substitute teaching certificate from the city of New York. So that way, if you can't find a show, I'll know that you can always pay the rent. And I was going to argue back, but I couldn't come up with a good argument for that because she wasn't telling me to stop doing this and start teaching.
Right.
It was the,
Have
look,
a backup.
if you're stuck, you could go in for a day, make a flat amount of money. They're not going to require you to come back. And it would be over by 3:30 in the afternoon and all of that. And so I'm like going,
Makes
okay.
sense.
Right. I couldn't argue back on it. And
parents are smart that way.
Yeah. So I actually did it. And I wound up at one point being a long-term sub for somebody who went on maternity leave, who was doing remedial math for elementary school students. And I had no training in any of this. But what I realized was that a lot of these kids were so petrified of making a mistake that it felt a lot like stage fright. So I worked with those kids mostly with theater games and things of that sort. And something close to 60% of the kids I was working with scored out of remediation by the end of the year. So the assistant,
that's lovely.
Right. The assistant principal said to me, all right, I'm not, there's a program for you at NYU using theater as a teaching modality. I really think that based upon what you've done here, if you'd like to take this further, go there, which is what I did.
And did you not at that time think, oh my God, have I given up on my dream?
Well, that was sort of the same thing. What was going on was I would go from classes at NYU uptown to Symphony Space to then work up at Symphony Space, sometimes on stage, sometimes backstage. So when they were recording,
and your 20s, you're in your 20s? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like, I haven't given things up, but I really did feel good working with those kids. And I thought, well, I could formally learn what I'm doing instinctively.
I love it because your ego wasn't in charge. Do you know how rare that is? I'm saying that I know ego is like a meme that everyone's spreading around on Facebook, but do you know how rare that is, especially in your 20s, to have that? Maybe it was because you were a precocious
I got
kid.
No idea.
You don't lead with your ego. You're leading with what does there's a theory called constructive living.
All right.
And what does the moment call for?
Yeah. While I was an undergrad, I had a really interesting thing. So I was massively overweight most of the time growing up. And between 1988 and 1989, I went from 293 pounds down to 293 pounds down to 180.
And that's while all this is going on, the school was.
Right. So that was while I was an undergrad. And what really showed me, it was really interesting to see people who had known me the previous year treat me one way, and to see people who had only met me afterward treat me in a completely different way.
I've had that. Yep.
And I really think that was this moment. I mean, after a lot of other crap, dealing with crap with that, it was just like, neither thing is me. None of these things are me. And then to basically have this success and have those kids score out, I'm like, I do this well, and I get to use the thing that I like to do when I'm working with them. So that's what led me to NYU. And like I said, I was running shows at the 47th Street Theater and at the Houseman on Theater Row and the Ariel on Theater Row. And, so that was how I paid my way while I was in graduate school. So I didn't feel like I left working in theater to then go into education, as much as I was kind of balancing what I had learned both ways.
And again, you were dealing with what the universe presented you with.
Yeah.
You weren't thinking, I'm doing this to get this in the end.
Right.
You were just reacting to life in the most logical way you could.
Right. Exactly.
Which is brilliant.
So, I mean, what was very strange for me, So I really feel that I learned my introduction to spoken word performance was at Symphony Space. If any of you listen to National Public Radio in the US, there's a show that's on weekly, and I think it's actually carried on Radio 4, Selected Shorts. Back then, it was the original founder of Selected Shorts in Symphony Space, Isaiah Sheffer, who was running it. But and now you're just as likely to hear Jane Curtin or I forget who else. But I like when Jane Curtin does it, because Jane Curtin was one of the talent back then. So I really feel that she knows what it originally was. So when she is the person hosting it, I feel like she holds that history.
Yeah, keeps the space.
Yeah, John Lithgow is another person who will host it often at this point. But what would happen is you'd have a live audience. It's kind of like doing a short story audio, short story in an audiobook live. But
Yeah.
if you can imagine an audience of about 150 people,
wow,
with an actor up on stage, and somebody has curated this short story collection for the day on a theme, and it's going out nearly live on WNYC and then recorded to go out on NPR in general. So with a 5-second delay, 15-second,
right.
some sort of really short delay between if they did something and when it went live. So I basically have had to, live in the moment, mix spoken word audio to make it so it would be level and understandable for people on the radio. And so someone showed me how to use a real compressor and a real EQ and a real limiter and a real expander.
But how do you do that live? You don't know what's going to come out of their mouth.
You learn, it's improvisation. So like two very different actors who I dealt with back then. Barbara Feldon, 99 from Get Smart.
Oh my God.
Right? So Barbara Feldon.
Wait, you met her?
Oh, I met a lot of these people.
I wanted to be her when I grow up.
I swear though. So she was the most amazingly simple person to engineer for, because she has dancer training. She's got that yoga ballerina kind of posture. And so she would do this thing. The microphone was here and she could work the audience, and she never went off mic no matter what she was doing in order to serve the story, right?
Okay.
Perfectly on mic. You got your levels right for her. Everything be perfect. Renee Auberjonois, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, Deep Space Nine, Odo, him, great actor. But the second somebody over here in this section of the audience had a big reaction, he'd lean off this way, off mic, and start talking over here, and then he'd come here. So you're playing levels and everything to try and keep him equal.
Oh, what that training must have done for your talent as an audiobook narrator, because that must have sharpened your ear, honed it.
Yeah. Well, the person I got to study. Yeah, well, it affects the way that I choose to master an audiobook. I've had engineers who basically don't come from live production like that, look at what I'm doing and ask me why I'm doing, like we get to a very similar result in the end, but we're doing it from a different perspective. And we eventually figured out it's because I had a 5 or 15-second delay between when they said it and when it was going to go out on the radio in order to get it to sound right. So that's where the madness of the method that I tend to work with comes from when it comes to things like that. But the other people I got to work with there who really affected my view of telling a story well would go to the McCourt brothers, Frank and Malachi McCourt. Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes. So his brother Malachi was a regular reader there. Frank would read there as well. Every year on Bloomsday, they would have, basically, if you can imagine, 13 hours of James Joyce's Ulysses, where people are where my girlfriend at the time was the program director there. And she would basically cut you pieces of Ulysses in order to create a theme for that year.
Wow. And
it would always end with Fanula Flanagan doing Molly's monologue on the toilet at the end of the night. and to hear Fanula Flanagan, so you would do this thing and would go through all these other things and would always wind its way back to Molly's monologue at the end with Fanula doing this wonderful thing. But Frank and Malachi were regular people there. Now, Frank McCourt, his day job, this author, his day job was he was a New York City high school English teacher. So when Malachi says to Frank, he goes, when he says, Frankie, you should read some of Stephen's writing, and he would do this again and again and again until Frank was like, well, if you'd like me to, I'm happy to. So that was a big thing to basically talk about story and story structure with Frank McCourt, who not only structures a story well, but having spent so long teaching in the New York City school system, it was like he had a good way to actually explain what he understood. So it was this really big contrast with F. Murray Abraham, who didn't have the words to explain what he innately understood, whereas Frank McCourt had spent all this time learning how to explain what he did.
So you were engaged in the craft. You were actively for years. I mean, would you say this was like the most extraordinary time of your life? The days you'll never forget kind of thing,
Before becoming a parent? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in a different way, but you know how we always remember our halcyon days?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which was the weird part about things coming full circle and coming back to audiobooks later on, because I wound up re-encountering a lot of the same people, which was this very strange
Small world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was that whole weird piece. So I've been here in the Berkshires for the last almost 25 years. So I'm not in New York City. I am northeast of New York. I'm between New York City and Boston. I'm basically equidistant between the two of them at this point.
I have to ask you a burning question.
Yeah.
I might have gotten this completely wrong.
Okay.
But do I remember that you at one time got the chance to audition for Jim Henson?
Yes.
Can I hear that story?
For Jim Henson, for Brian, because Jim Henson had passed. Okay, so when Jim Henson had passed away, at first Brian Henson didn't really want to do Kermit. So, and it was in the process of him hearing other people that he then came out and apologized to everyone, said, I'm so sorry for having wasted your time. But, it's like, and so we got to hear Brian kind of like hit the moment of going, my dad really would want me to do this. And he had enjoyed getting to hear us all work. I got to.
It was Kermit you got to audition for?
Well, he didn't want to do his dad's voices. Initially he didn't want to do his dad's voices.
But you auditioned for Kermit.
I was one of a large number of people, and I survived the cuts until Brian apologized to everybody. So I was in the room as the room kept getting smaller. But then I was also in the room when Brian said, yeah, I've got to do it. I'm really sorry for putting you all through this. But it was a great experience because I got to play with Frank Oz, which was this hugely cool moment.
And also it didn't end in another guy got the gig. It ended in the right guy got the gig, and it was that the right guy was really kind of scared about taking over completely for his father. He was ready to take over the business. He was ready to think about how things like Muppet Treasure Island and everything were going to be structured. Yeah. But the last piece was something he was worried about doing. He just didn't know that he wanted to step completely into being his father in that way. Yeah.
And so, I survived the first few rounds of cuts. I've got no idea if I would have been cut in the next round after that. But
that must have been so exciting, though.
It was wild. Well, so being born in 1968, Sesame Street starts in 1969. So I am the Sesame Street generation. So it was very, very strange talking to Frank Oz and hearing Grover. Right?
Oh. I'm so excited. I mean, yeah. Name dropping doesn't normally get me because I don't know anyone's names, but that's fabulous.
So just getting to meet those people and doing a couple of little bits back and forth was a lot of fun. And of course that means that, I'd have to work at it now in order to get back there vocally. But if you ever hear Jim Henson in an interview, my normal speaking voice is actually pretty darn close to his, which is sort of the reason why
I could
it,
hear
it
you
kind
as
of works.
Kermit. I could.
Right. You know, the whole to introduce our, yeah, you do the whole thing. You know,
I love
we
it.
we
I love
can
it. I
go
can
there
hear
and
it.
play with it now, but that was really kind of the thing. It was one of my agents at that point who said, you do kind of sound like Jim Henson,
Yeah.
so I'd like you to go in to read for this. And I had no idea what was going to go on. And then, yeah, so that was fun.
So your first audiobook,
Okay.
actual audiobook,
Yeah.
how did that happen? How did you feel when
Okay.
that happened?
So I had moved up here,
Yeah.
and I was teaching at a couple of different schools, including the local performing arts high school. One of my daughter's earliest memories of me is me hanging lights and what she used to call when she was little, daddy on the ceiling.
Oh.
You know, she would, if I was watching her, she'd come in and, you know, hang out with the teenagers at the school, and, you know, we're hanging lights and doing things. So that was like one of her big early memory things
I love
there,
that, daddy on the ceiling.
daddy on the ceiling. You know, but what had happened was I was still doing a lot of audio engineering part-time for people, and a couple of people who were in the industry slightly before us, who were working for the publishers, so they weren't ACX people, independently of each other. Within about 6 weeks of each other, they both said to me, so we had a lot of fun performing with you in, you know, on stage. You're now editing our stuff in audio. Have you ever thought of doing audiobooks? And they didn't know that they both said this to me within about 6 weeks of each other.
Oh, that's the universe. That's when the universe is like,
Right,
literally, I'm trying
right.
to get the
Well,
message to
and
you.
and I was performing up here. So
Yeah.
I'm in the 5 colleges area. I'm between Smith College, Mount Holyoke, UMass, the University of Massachusetts, Amherst College, and Hampshire College. And those 5 schools have a collective arts program. So it's like one mega university arts program. But as you can imagine, even the graduate students are kind of young. So every time they would do something like, you know, Oscar Wilde, or they would do anything, you know, they needed to cast parent roles.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of performing in those sorts of things, and also in other other opportunities to perform here and there. But yeah, 2 different people who are still recording audiobooks now, both said to me, so why aren't you doing this? So I scheduled one session with a coach to sort of see if things kind of worked, and that person was Carol Monda.
Ah, yeah. Good
And
pick.
yeah, yeah, you know, I wound up, you know, Carol and I wound up working on that one thing, and I was upfront with her, saying, you know, this is my background, this is who I am. I'm trying to figure out if audiobooks make sense. And we had this one really great session, and I left there feeling good. Since I had contacted Carol through Edge, when I contacted Edge Studios again, they did not pair me up with Carol after that. They paired me up with Johnny Heller.
Mm.
So I wound up working with Johnny on my first audiobook demo. And
Oh,
I wound up taking that demo with me. He said, you know, you need to get this done and show up at APAC this year. And then I got on the roster with a couple of places there, and moved from the first couple of audiobooks on ACX into sort of balancing ACX work with non-ACX work.
do you know
And
what though?
yeah.
I know I forgot all about our subject for today,
Oh
but
God, yeah.
yeah, I completely forgot because this has been so good. But actually, even more importantly, and full disclosure, Stephen was the recipient of a call from me when I got my first vaccine, dying of a fever, saying, I wasn't going to say this publicly, but saying, what the hell is wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why am I not a success? Am I like a horrible narrator? You know, and I'm just saying this in front of you all because I know that every single one of us has
Mhm.
that day. And the thing about it is that strikes me about everything you've said about your journey and your career is that it's, you know how they say people get lucky, but
Mhm.
it takes like a lot of years of hard work to get lucky.
Mhm.
So all those connections you made, and not
Mhm.
just that, the teaching, the working with the students and helping them succeed, the sound stuff, that all
Yeah.
came together into a perfect soup when you were at APAC. Whereas you weren't just showing up at APAC, I'm going to record an audiobook and I'm good at narrating. You were Stephen, who has made connections with people, reached out to people, learns how, knows what people in the business want, worked with you. You went from the inside, didn't you,
Mhm.
of the
Well,
business?
I think so for me, and this kind of gets back to the thing that we didn't really talk about. But for me, everything comes back to the story is the key, right? Whether I'm reading a story to my daughter when she was little at bedtime, or I'm reading the book here, or I've got a friend in the hospital who doesn't want the TV on but wants to hear something read to, doesn't matter. The venue, telling this around a campfire in the middle of the night, right? 3:30 in the morning, people been hanging out at the fire all night, everybody's in a slightly altered space, you start to tell a story, right? Doesn't matter what the space is, the story is more important for me as a performer than any of the other pieces. That's where things come back down to, and how that kind of goes back to the original thing that I thought we were going to wind up talking about,
I
which is
know,
branding.
sorry, I forgot completely.
No, it's, I mean, because when we started, you were saying, hey, so how did you get to here? I hear a lot of people talk about branding and then they come back with 3 words that describe them, and they stop there. Um, and here's the thing. When If you're going to choose 3 words that anybody could choose, then you haven't really differentiated yourself. Now, for all of us who have been at places like APAC, we've heard branding discussions where people say, if you don't brand yourself, other people will brand you. So you may as well do the effort to brand yourself. The problem is, most of what we're learning, we're pulling off of YouTube videos. And the YouTube videos with the highest views are the YouTube videos with the simplest advice, not necessarily the best advice. And so if somebody thinks of branding and they think these 3 words, now I'm done. And so now their website is their name and those 3 words. If I wanted to say, light, bubbly, intriguing, that doesn't really mean anything, but it might be a description of my voice. It might be a description of my voice. I have no idea, but that isn't a brand, because my voice is the tool that I use to tell the story. So
And
it's
everything
not
you've
me.
done, you and I, hold that thought, because I'm not going to take you
Okay.
off it, I swear.
Okay.
Look at your entire career. You've
Right.
been working at telling that story. Every single step in your career has been to tell that story. So
So
you're not picking up a
yeah,
video or a coach and working from the outside in. You're going towards your why. Or
right.
your why, I know you said, was to help people do good work, but
Yeah, yeah,
everything you've
yeah.
said is to tell the story.
Well, but that's why. So early on, I got a challenge from somebody to have a really short bio that
Yeah.
would actually really describe me. And so my bio has always been, Stephen has been telling stories his whole life professionally since 1991. Because everything else is secondary to that, really.
Hmm.
You know, um, but to talk about, so that branding piece and that walking
Yeah.
into a place like APAC piece, whether it's over here or whether it's virtual or whatever, what are you going? It's like, if, like, as an example, before this started, I was talking with Daniela about a previous one of these, where she and Kitty Hendricks were talking. Now, vocally, the two of you are similar, but your life experience that the two of you bring to the table make you completely different people. So if I'm going to compete on sound of voice, then the two of you are up for every job if the only thing that mattered was the sound of voice. But your performance background and her performance background are from very different parts of performance.
Yeah.
Her design background, so all the different kinds
And
of things.
as actors, our job is to get up there naked in front of everyone
Right.
and be good with that. And
Right.
so who you are naked,
Mhm.
that's metaphorically speaking, obviously, who
Mhm.
you are naked, who Kitty is and who I am are different human beings.
Right.
So that we could each tell a story equally well, I would
Mhm.
like to think, with
Mhm.
the same, relatively same type of voice, approach it from the same way, but you're hiring the person, the human being. And the human
Well,
being has not learned how to be a human being by watching 20 videos on YouTube and getting every up and coming
right.
coach, not knowing why.
Right. And so, I mean, to think about it this way, one of you might be the vocal, it's like, yes, I could use the same three descriptors if I were
Right,
just describing vocal quality.
right,
But one of you may be a viola and the other one might be an oboe. They are in the same range, but one is a string instrument and one's a woodwind. The
right,
very same music is going to sound different, even if they're playing the same notes.
right.
The instrument that is you is what is the unique thing that you are bringing to the
The
table.
spirit and the energy, which is why I'm not
Right.
afraid of AI, which is why you learn to use it. I think people are making a mistake being so scared, and they should learn to utilize it. Same with positron. I
Yeah,
love
well,
positron.
I think the thing to remember is nothing that we're going to do is going to stop the march of AI. It's figuring out that once AI has a larger footprint, two things: which parts of voiceover will be more or less susceptible to AI,
Mm,
and once AI is here, where will the jobs for the human voices be, and what
right.
can you do now to prepare yourself for that
Right.
eventuality?
And
So,
become part of the solution, not part of the problem. Become part of the progress.
right. So let's take apart the AI problem for a minute. So right now, the problem is that the shorter the piece, the easier it is to fool somebody. So let's start there. Short form voiceover, if we take everything else off the table, short form voiceover is much more susceptible to AI replacing a voice actor.
Right.
So, and then we remember what happened with voices.com, and they're working with an AI company
Mm-hmm.
and a big data company. And the fact that they technically at this point own every audition, not just everybody who's won work, they own all that data, all those voice samples are there. So in the future, a real actor is going to be competing with the fact that somebody who wants to hire someone can go, I want a 35-year-old female from Atlanta, Georgia, with some college education, and they describe it that way, and they get a couple of samples of a voice, and then they see their little 30-second commercial, and they go, okay, I want them to go up on the second line, I want them to pause right after the name of the product, and I want them to emphasize this word, and they get exactly that read back, and they didn't have to sift through 500 auditions. Is it a great recording? No, but it serves the need that they asked for.
Right.
And it's going to be hidden in a music bed and all of that. And at most, it'll be 30 seconds. More likely these days, it'll be 8 seconds because of how short commercials have gotten. So short form voiceover is very susceptible. Right now, as far as audiobooks are concerned, you would simply be moving the actor from behind the microphone to behind the computer keyboard, because the actor would have to be the person sitting there behind the keyboard fixing the performance of the AI. So long form voiceover is going to take longer. And I could spin out for you how, in a world where, let's say, ACX buys positron, they're not. But if they were, I could spin out for you how ACX buying positron would totally, create a situation where royalty share audiobooks would go away, but it would take time.
Yeah.
Because I saw a couple of eyebrows go up when I said that. Here's the theoretical for you.
Panic. Now there's going to be panic messages
Well, no,
all over
let's
Facebook.
let's think about this. So for those of you who have used positron is a proofing system,
I love
and how you are
positron.
supposed to use positron is you feed it both the book and the voiceover. It does its best to match them, and then anytime it thinks the voice has deviated from the text, it highlights it just like a misspelled word in Microsoft Office.
And then you get a proofer to listen with a human
Right.
ear.
Right, exactly. So that's how the
Afterwards.
tool's supposed to be used. Let's
Yeah.
spin how this could be turned into something. that would get rid of all royalty share audiobooks. So ACX buys Positron. So immediately they've got that interface. Now ACX doesn't need to have people upload a PDF because they have the ebook already from the Kindle version, which gets fed in. So now the rights holder is told, okay, you could do a royalty share with a person and get 20%, and the other person will get 20%. Or you could use our system, design your own voice, and you get to keep 30%. So they sweeten the pot for the rights holder. If the and the rights holder then chooses the voice they want. They want a British woman from the Midlands in her mid-30s, blah, 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 blah. They choose that for their cozy mystery, and this is what they're going to do. Now, let's think about this. The rights holder then listens. Remember, it's going to be pretty close to word perfect because it's being generated from the ebook, but they use that same Positron AI to mark where they want to pause, mark when they want the voice to do something different. It then goes back, teaches the AI to do the different piece. And now, essentially after a few hundred or a few thousand of those, the AI is making better choices. So there are less corrections being made.
The element that's missing
so much further in the future.
Yeah, and people are messy. It's the same thing with Zoom. And to be honest, I am missing that human connection part of myself. I am quite happy. I was on phone calls with guys when I was in school, perfectly madly in love, never seen him in my life. I don't need the human connection. I'm not that girl. But even I've noticed, do you see how fast people were scrambling for real life interaction? Do you know how close the authors are to their narrators?
All of this I know. What I'm trying to point out is the number of stars that would have to align.
Yeah.
In order to make that happen, so there would be an easy path to get to audiobooks, is huge.
And people wouldn't want it. They like the messy.
I don't think Audible is going to be the purchaser of Positron. If they are, this would be a logical reason why. I don't think that's what's going to happen. And remember, startups tend to be set up not to be run as a business ongoing. They tend to be set up in order to get purchased by a larger company. So think about and watch who.
I know I did ask them on their call. So where are you guys going? I thought, maybe I should.
Well, the two exit strategies, right? So the difference between a startup and a business is a startup is a group of people who are searching around for a business strategy. A business is a group of people who execute a certain business strategy and rarely change from it. They will work to expand it.
Right.
Pivoting, the whole taking our company and shifting here and shifting there and shifting here. That's what the job of a startup is. And when venture capitalists put money into a startup, they're looking to get 3 to 5 times. So that's 300 to 500% of their investment back. That's the goal when they're putting in their money. So that's why there's pressure to sell to RB Media, to Find a Way, to Audible, to whoever, because those are the kind of places that can buy a company for that much money. And what would they be buying? They don't care about proofing audiobooks. They want the AI.
Yeah.
So it's going to be someone who finds value in the core asset of the company more than how we are using the software at the end of the day. But so short form voiceover, dubbing, where something is in another language and needs to be in English, those kinds of things. Those places are going to be much more susceptible to AI coming in and taking the work than we are. Looping, when they shoot a scene on location, they tend not to mic all the people to get the right kind of background noise. So that tends to get added afterward. If you can say that you want to have 8 people and describe who those 8 people are and give them lines, you can create looping tracks using AI. So until we hear those things, we've got less worry. But the question is, where is long form voiceover going? Yeah, that's the interesting thing, because that is going to be the most protected thing, because that's going to be the hardest thing to simulate.
I'm trying to get the part. I've got the old-fashioned creative tendency to balk at the thought of business. Like, leave me alone to do my art, which is not good.
Let me redefine what a publisher is for you then. So let's not think of a publisher as someone who publishes books. A publisher is a bank. A publisher is an investment company. They invest in book futures. They are a commodities trader. They acquire the independent, they acquire the IP, the intellectual property. And they then, in the past, they used to license out the audiobook, the movie rights, and things like that. These days, because the technology has gotten simpler, more and more the publishers are trying to figure out how they can leverage those subsidiary rights in-house instead of sending them out. So with the fact that Netflix is now a movie studio, and Amazon is now a movie studio, and Hulu is now a movie studio, what do you do if you're Macmillan? What do you do if you're Penguin Random House? You've got this IP, which could be turned into movies, TV, could be turned into audiobooks, could be turned into full-length audio dramas. What are you doing with the IP? We're going to be seeing the publishers being the next round of Hulu and Netflix and HBO. They're going to be figuring out how to do this in-house and leverage those things. So is it going to be a single voice audiobook? Are they going to figure that, no, we want to try the full cast audio drama? No, we want to do a made for television thing. We're going to do it, so where are we then? Are we focusing on things that are just us and our voices in the booth? If we are we thinking that we're towards a renaissance of radio plays?
We do have to think, we do have to think ahead, and I do believe in keeping open-minded because I'm sorry, I had cassette tape. I still have cassette tapes in an old drawer somewhere, and the old little Walkmans. And now the first day, I know this sounds silly, but and it's no difference, but I thought it was the coolest thing on earth. You know how the internet came out? I'm aging myself here. And it was like such a big deal. And like the first night you got the internet in your house, you didn't sleep for like 3 days. But when the Fire Stick, Audible was on Fire Stick, and I could type my name in, and I was on TV. It was so stupid. I was like a full-grown adult doing a happy dance in my living room because it's exciting.
Oh, it's
this
hugely
stuff is
exciting. It is. It's absolutely hugely exciting. It's amazing. It's, in a way, you can look at each of us as a startup, right? Because none of us, the smaller the business, the more nimble, the more agile you can be, the easier it is for you to take your work and redirect if need be. To go back to the other thing, all your life experience before you've come into audiobooks is hugely useful if you're trying to start working with any of the publishers, as an example.
I'm a red-nosed clown. That's my backup.
Right. It's like you talk about that. I talk about my education background. I talk about the fact that I brought a business through an incubator. I do all those kinds of things. And then if they have, so usually my first book will be nonfiction, right? Because I've said all those things. And the reason why those things matter to the publishers is because they know that at that point, they don't need to pay for a researcher. They know that they are depending upon your domain knowledge to make the production of this book easier. So that's a wonderfully helpful thing from their perspective when it comes to that. It makes a difference, and it's a way to get over that little boundary there. So that's that piece coming in. But when we're looking forward and we're saying, okay, so I think we're going to be hearing more and more full cast stuff because the technology has just changed so much, especially in this last year. And there are now tools that I can use where we can, where I can record full quality audio with you where you are at the same time with Andrea M's on the West Coast, and I can have us in a session. And at the end, I get 3 separate WAV files, one for you, one for Andrea, one for me.
Yeah, we do that with voiceover all the time. I did that with an ELT the other day. It's
right. So that technology, so in the early 2000s, I was producing a podcast. So back in like 2007, 2009, I was ranking podcasts on Apple Podcast, back, on the iTunes thing back in the day, before moving over here into audiobooks. But what we needed to do then when we were trying to do full cast stuff would be that you didn't get to act with anybody. You gave 3 to 5 reads of every single line you had, and then the person producing would try to match them as best as possible.
fun
So
job.
you can imagine though how limiting and how flat those performances are because you're not getting to act off the other person. If you were really going to spend a lot of time, you would do like a Skype session and be in the actor's ear, but then that would mean you would have to do that with every single actor in order for them to use you as all the other characters that they're acting against. So that way you can create that moment. So back then, that's what it was. But now, as long as we can all be in a session together, the technology is there for us all to do this. So since that's there, and there isn't that obstacle in the way of full cast work, is that the next thing?
But do you know how
And
scary it is that you're saying back in the day in 2009? 2009, I was like,
yeah,
I'm like one diet away from 2009. Like, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. It
that's
was,
the thing. It's like, right. I've got a theory as to why we all like have this 20-year time dilation. Why so many people think that the 80s were 20 years ago. I actually think it's Marvel's fault, but that's a whole other thing.
oh, that's
I could go into
intriguing.
why it's Marvel's fault.
But that,
Version of why it's Marvel's fault.
yes, please, because you
Okay.
can't leave us hanging.
All right. So Captain America is in World War II. Yes. So
Yes.
the greatest generation, people who fought in
Yes.
World War II. Tony Stark is supposed to be in the 1960s, but instead, because they got Robert Downey Jr. and they wanted everybody in modern day, because remember, read enough of the comic books. It's Iron Man versus Titanium Man. It's Cold War sorts of things,
Right.
all that jazz, So, but they move him to the modern day. By doing that, he is no longer a baby boomer. He is now Gen X, right?
Yeah.
But what they did was they left Howard Stark his father, as opposed to making Howard Stark his grandfather. If they simply had changed the movies and made him his grandfather, I think Marvel added to the whole confusion and time dilation, because when they moved him upward, they left this 20-year gap that they pretend didn't exist.
But if you think about it, you're the TV generation too, aren't you? And
yeah,
I think that we're all informed by the TV, and it's, so you're right. I mean, Marvel aside, when they screw with our time zones, which they do all the time for their own reasons,
right,
we lose all.
Right. I mean, you and I grew up with the same things. We grew up with things, it's Sesame Street when you're younger. It's Happy Days, talking about Happy Days when you're in middle school or elementary school, the day after it airs. So it's all of these things, and there's a lot of nostalgia there, which sort of creates this weird time slip where there's 20 years that are lost and
Wonder Years, Quantum Leap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, quick question. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to, because I'm noticing. Well, no, I'm noticing the comments going down. You might not want to talk about this. Don Harvey said, "Why don't I make you sing 'It Isn't Easy Being Green'?"
Oh, the whole "It's not easy being green. Green's not." I'm not practiced. I'm so far out. I would actually need to work with it with somebody who, for a good half hour.
I think that was a win. I think that's a win that's going to go down. And so so you've got your why. You're doing the audiobooks.
Yeah.
You're inspiring because you're living your life now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas not always like when you get to start living your life, which I'm guilty of.
I mean, if that's so, when you come from a family where people tend to die young, if you keep putting it off, Well, I'm just being honest with you. I'm way older than my father was when he passed away at this point,
Oh,
you know.
so that
You know,
makes it so it's always in the
right, right,
forefront of
right.
your mind.
You know, so it's like if you know, and you pass all those milestones, you know, like I was older than he was when he passed away, or when my daughter was the age that I was when my father passed away. All those kinds of things. It's like if you keep putting things off, eventually you lose the time to do them because it's just gone.
Yeah.
Now I'm still here, I'm healthy, I'm knocking on things that look like wood. But it's like you can, yeah, you can put things off, or you can try, you can just try to find some happiness in the world around you now, something in the moment that makes you feel like you made a difference today.
And doing it, not just reading about it or planning to do it, but
Well,
actually living it.
well, and it doesn't necessarily need to be big things either. You know,
Yeah.
it's like the number of people who ask me why I don't sell second opinion. This sounds like a side thing, but it isn't. It's connected because I wrote second opinion to solve a specific problem. And if I describe it in the real way, the narrator will know why I made second opinion, and she probably doesn't even know it was because of her. Um, so we have a narrator who's based in Alaska, who at the time had satellite internet, which means when she was trying to upload a 14-hour book, she has wonderfully fast download speeds, but satellite internet's notoriously slow going up.
Hmm.
And if you send me an entire book and there were chapters that had small problems in them and you fix them, you then have to send the entire book again and again.
Oh
And
yeah,
I'm like,
because you
this
have,
just makes,
yeah.
right, right. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is taking all night. This makes no sense. I've got to be able to build something so people can use this on the end. So initially, I just gave it to the people who were uploading stuff to me, and that was it. And then I thought, I can let everybody have it. What's what do I get out of it? Right. So there's two ways to explain it. I know that I've made people's lives easier, right? So it's I'm holding a door for somebody, I'm helping them, I'm carrying somebody's groceries, I'm doing whatever. That's what that is. That's what the Audible sample finder is. That's what all those things are. It's like I made a tool that's useful for a few people, but if I let everybody use it, that's great. I often run into people who don't understand that, who push back on me saying, but you could be making money off of it.
But Stephen, I've got people saying the same thing about Cup of Joe. It's now I'm up to
Right.
3 people.
But right, right,
But
right. But for
there's a reason. It's something can exist without being business.
right. So I like having made a difference at the end of the day for people.
Yeah.
You're creating connections and you are helping people find a place of hope, and you're creating community here. And that's a wonderful thing, right? But there are people who don't get that. So when I hit people who don't get why I'm giving away the software, I had to eventually come up with something they would understand just to finish the conversation. And I'd say, well, if I sold it, and somebody had a problem, or they thought my software ruined their audio or something, then they get mad at me because it didn't work. They paid me good money, and I'm avoiding that whole thing by giving it away. And there are
Yeah.
people who only understand that, and I'm sad when I have to give that as a thing, because honestly, it's like, you know what, this helped me. If I write it this way, it'll help you. I've had to rewrite it in order to keep it running on Macs and to be in other places, which is why it's gone through all of its
It's work and
iterations.
people I
But
hope are, but you created something for the sake of creating something,
right,
and it
I
turned
create,
out to be wonderful and
well,
benefited
yeah,
many of us for
right.
years.
So it's a good tool. The other things are good tools. They're there, so the Audible sample finder is there. Even the database that Google set up, but it wasn't easily searchable to check to see if something is in the public domain yet. So I thought I can make this very easily searchable. So it's on the website as well, where
Yeah.
you can put in a partial name of a product, and it will
Wow.
tell you if it can find it in the database that Google put together of,
Wow.
yeah. So, so that's there. And I built it. I used it for a couple of projects. Once I knew it worked, I just put it up there, and people do use it as well. in order to double check if something is in the public domain or not. What would I get out of selling it versus giving it to somebody? How would I be better off by selling it?
I mean, and the difference I can't compare, because the difference is I could see how that could make money, but like Cup of Joe, I can't even see how anybody, what would they get out of buying it? It doesn't make money. I'm like, you do know it doesn't make any money, right? But it's like, I don't like the thinking. I don't like the thinking that every single thing has to have a bottom line and you have
Right.
to be getting something for everything you do is a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a transaction. It's some things are just hard.
Right, unless you want to redefine what it means to be a transaction, right? I
Mm.
mean, we are having a transaction now. We are interacting by its nature as a transaction. But what we're getting out of it isn't something that we're purchasing. At
Right.
the end of the day, when you and I talk, when we feel better and then we're more productive and we do everything else, it's that rising tide raises all boats thing. There's
Yeah.
value there. If I feel as good from having helped someone as the person who got helped, then I've won.
And also business sense. Think about it. I've got 500 people on Cup of Joe. 500 people.
Mhm.
If I do everything in my power to help them succeed, where are those 500 people going to be in 8 years when
Mhm.
the industry changes and I ever find myself at a weak spot? 500 people that I've
Mhm.
helped for 8 years. Not that I'm doing it for that reason, but you know what I
Right.
mean? You've
Yeah.
got a team of 500 strong, happy people.
Right.
That it's nothing's wasted if it comes from a good place, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what you've put into this industry and what you've given to people, it comes back. I mean, every call you have, people send me messages. When is Stephen on? When is the love that people feel for you, even on an, I know I'm going to get woo-woo here, but even on an energetic level,
Mhm.
the amount of goodwill you have directed toward you because of the way you have treated and approached the people that you've worked with over the years, the amount of goodwill and gratitude and good energy coming at you. Do you know what I mean? It's that's got to go for something. That's got to be worth more than one paycheck for selling it.
Yeah. I feel better for having for working in that way. I sleep better.
And the
Um
messages are coming in. Truth. I will be eternally grateful for the existence of SJC.
yeah.
And they've all been saying it. The comments,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
I'll print the comment for you and send it to you afterwards. But it's and again, it's you told the story. You fought your whole life to do what you knew had to be done. You've done it, one could argue, extremely successfully. You've it's the lack of ego thing. You haven't let the ego get in the way of you being an artist, and it shows in your work. I mean, it's a lot of people they can be kind, everyone loves them, or they can be really, really good. We all know the really, really good actors
Mhm.
with dodgy personalities, but you fought for what you know is right in all those areas, and that's admirable. I mean, that is really admirable. I could only hope to someday be like that. You know, I got a bit of the ego. I got to kind of push. What do they call it? I heard this somewhere, the itty bitty shitty committee in my head. But
That would be
you're.
a great. Have you ever done the artist way, the Julia Cameron artist way
I've
thing?
done the first week about 10 times.
All right. So instead of picking it up again and doing it, there's a wonderful interview with her and Russell Brand, because he does a podcast
I
and it's
love
on.
Russell Brand.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so the whole thing, they're great together, he and Julia Cameron, in part because at the beginning he goes, okay, so now that I have you here, I want to ask you about this. And he basically says, is this 12 step? And the two of them then started talking about recovery together.
Mm.
And it kind of put the whole artist way thing in another light, because, you know, that is a huge part of her background. And if you know his story, it's a huge part of his background. And it kind
Yeah.
of like
Wow.
looking at the whole higher power thing and the whole like, all right, so you're, you know, it's like, if you empower your critic instead of empowering the artist inside you, what's going on? Where is that power for the critic coming from? Whether or not you believe in a higher power, you know, it's like, it's the whole thing. But it's a really good, if you just type in Russell Brand and
I'm
Julia
so going to
Cameron
look it up.
on
And
YouTube, you'll find
but
them.
what it is
They're great.
it's complicating things, and it's adding layers on top of what we've said that you do so well, is just keep it simple and go straight for the story.
Yeah, you know, it's what's hard is we started all this, you and I, talking about branding. And I keep coming back to the fact that you can't, what's difficult is, okay, I have a brand. You've spent time talking about what my brand is. Other people might talk about my brand in a different way, but there would be overlap, right? It doesn't fit very easily into put 3 words on a website. But if you have a very clear idea of what your brand is, and you can talk about it, and you sit down with a designer, then that designer pulls what they feel is the most visual pieces from there, and you then work together to come up with things. And that all comes together in order to create a unified look, a unified feeling, a unified sound. But it's so much different than the just find 3 words that describe your voice, because at the end of the day, 2 actors with a similar voice still come at the work from a very different place, and they're non-interchangeable. They won't do the same role in the same way, you know.
Our humanity, our soul.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Each of us has our own, and
right.
we have to bring it in the room with us.
You are a unique instrument, and how the story is going to resonate with your instrument is going to be unique to you.
And every single call we have comes back to that.
Yeah.
Grabbing that, holding on to that original spark, developing it, protecting it, and using it, nurturing it.
Right. So as I slowly move what I'm doing towards, you know, doing more full cast production and things being released as part of a, you know, in more of a streaming podcast shape and all this other stuff, and some of this over time being opened out to people being able to use it for their own productions on Spoken Realms. As I'm doing that, it's because as I'm looking at the future, and as I'm attending virtual conferences and things and figuring things out, I'm thinking, well, this is the bet that I'm making. This is where I think things are going. This is where I think spoken word storytelling is going. And I could be wrong. You know, somebody else could have an idea. But I think that since we're all one-person businesses for the most part, taking a look at playing mental chess with whatever information you've got, figuring out, well, how could things change in the next 3 years? Even if I underestimate how quickly AI is going to evolve or whatever, what could be different? Well, the pandemic has made a lot more people listen in places they weren't listening before, but it's also taken away a lot of places they were listening. You know, we're not listening at the gym in this last year so much.
Yeah.
You know, and for
no
a
more
lot of
walks.
People, right. So a lot of those things really changed how people listen. And we can look at the negatives of that, because I'm guessing that a lot fewer self-help books are listened to, because I know a lot of people who would listen while they would work out usually do things that they found motivational as opposed to escapist stuff when they would do that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So maybe when we see the next things, maybe we'll see much more fiction was consumed as people were looking for an escape during 2020. I'm not sure. Let's see how that goes, and let's see if that's persistent. Does, you know, I've seen a lot more full cast stuff happening even before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And as we talked about already, the technology is kind of there to be able to make it so we all don't necessarily need to be in the same place to do that.
Yeah.
So now that even the publishers who were really reluctant to record remotely have had to spend the last year recording remotely. You know, sure, they'll still bring some people into studio, but I doubt they're going to go back to what they were doing before. So does that mean more people who don't live in New York or LA will get to work for Penguin, as an
Mm,
example?
mm,
Because Penguin was bringing people into studio almost exclusively, except when they wanted a particular person. But
yeah.
Penguin has had to learn how to take their in-house production process and work with remote people.
Yeah,
Is this,
the whole game, the
yeah,
whole field is changing. And I
right.
think we need to spend less time being anxious about change and more time being excited about change. It's like anxiety, it's like fear and excitement are the same thing. Stage
Well,
fright and excitement are the same thing.
what are you doing to try to get a taste of the future now?
Me,
What are you doing to try to find yeah, you
me
personally?
personally,
Yeah, yeah.
I am okay. I can I'm having people like Positron on as guests on Cup of Joe.
Right. So you're using the show
Yeah,
for research and you're
yeah.
bringing people in. And I think
I didn't
that's,
mean to, but it's
well, but
become
that's a lot of the same reason why. So, you know, have you ever heard Suzanne Freeman talk about why she started the whole webcast thing? It was
no.
because she had all these questions and she felt she needed the pretense of the show to get to ask
I'm
them.
not going to say that I planned on having all the top coaches
Right,
free coaching
right.
twice a week. But yeah, it's been when I realized how much you
Yeah,
could learn and how much
yeah.
wisdom and knowledge and
Hmm.
it's just there's so much out there.
Right. So, you know, so that's one thing. One thing I think I would like for you to look at doing this year is there was a conference that went virtual last year. So if it goes virtual this year, I'll be able to do it again.
I have
But
to do
you're actually right
conferences.
there. So
Yeah,
it's a London conference called Future Book.
yeah.
And Future Book is exactly what it sounds like. It's the publishers getting together, looking at their data, talking about where they think things are going in the next 3 to 5 years.
I think showing up in real life is the next step. And now I've had
Yeah.
my second vaccine, so I have run
Right.
out of excuses for not leaving the flat.
Right. I know. I totally get that. I get that. And, you know, it's the bird, your bird, my cat, you know, they're all like going, you know, they've gotten very used to our faces
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're going
Very.
to need to get unused to it again. But like trying to find the places where you can sort of get these pieces, you know, you're going to talk to Positron, you're going to talk to, you know, up and coming production companies and all these different things. You know, there's other people to reach out to and figure things out so you can get a better sense of what's coming down. But
And it would be a good place to wear my faux fur, my new boots. You
mhm,
know, there's no point buying
all
these
the
things if you're
fun.
just on Zooms. Okay, now
Yeah.
we should wrap up. We've started to kind of
Okay.
have people drop off, but I do have I didn't forget we'd had a couple of questions coming in particular from Rebecca, but they're
Sure.
about public domain, and I think it would take you longer to answer. So if it's okay, I'm going to send you the chat, and either I'll get the answer from you if you've got a
Sure.
chance, and,
Is
and
it about
I'll
since I don't see the question, is it about a particular book or is it just something in
it's
general?
general stuff about public domain, but it will, I guarantee you it'll take more than a few
Okay, so
seconds to
without
answer.
knowing the question, just to sort of say something, even if you're not in the U.S., the countries whose laws you want to pay attention to are U.S. laws, because the U.S. is the biggest market. So if the book is in the public domain someplace else and it's not in the public domain in the U.S., is it actually worth your time to produce it if the bulk of people can't consume it? This is something
Okay,
that I've had a good few times with people saying this book's in the public domain in Canada or
I don't
wherever.
know if it's the same. Okay, I'll just say it's what is your process for determining the copyright public domain standing for an audiobook, particularly
Right.
when it comes to books that are public domain original. So you'd already seen the question, and also the other
No,
one was
I haven't seen the question.
well,
That
see,
was off
you're
the top
very
of my
good. You
head.
probably get it a lot. The other one was how
Yeah,
does a copyright search tool work? I get no
got it.
results when I put in public domain stuff as well as non-PD stuff.
So if you're talking about the tool on my website, what you want to do is take words that are in the center of the title and put in partial title, because even like as an example, Peter Pan is not the name of the book isn't Peter Pan, it's Peter and Wendy. So you actually need to know what the real name of the published material was.
Got it.
So you want to try using partial title searches with that and just looking at what's there. And what you'll wind up finding is it will give you a lot of information. What you can prove is not that something is in the public domain. You can prove that something isn't. So there is no way for you to actually prove it is in the public domain, except if it is old enough that it would be in the public domain everywhere. And I'm not going to go into the details of what that means. But if the book is not old enough that it would be in the public domain everywhere, if it was in the time period where it would have needed to be renewed, you're looking for a renewal in its 28th year in the US or wherever else it had to be. So it's what you can prove is that a book is still in copyright. You can't prove the book is in the public domain. And I realize that's confusing, but what it basically means, every time you're producing a public domain work, you are taking a risk, because unless you've done enough research that you are certain it is in the public domain, you may get a takedown notice if you've done it incorrectly. And not every takedown notice is correct, by the way. I've had estates of different authors show up and they were wrong. The content was in the public domain.
Oh, so you can you challenge it?
Oh, yeah. In that particular case, an Arthur C. Clarke short story is in the public domain, but there was a collection that short story was in later on that was named exactly the same as the short story. They showed up with a takedown notice for thinking that we had published the collection, not just the single short story. So once we proved to them saying, nope, this is just the audio for the one short story that's in the public domain, not for the collection with the other 20 and change stories that were still under copyright.
So now I confess I don't really understand the question. Did you answer that question about what is your process for determining the copyright, PD standing for an audiobook?
So yeah,
especially when it comes to
my
books?
process. So as far as what I'm accepting and what I'm not accepting, if somebody until a narrator has, so if you're in the system and you can produce your own content, I'm paying a lot more attention to the first few projects to see if you have a basic understanding of the kind of research you're doing. Essentially, in those cases, I'm acting as a distributor. So you are holding the rights. I have actually interacted when somebody shows up at Audible saying, hey, there's a problem, and I've given some advice, but at the end of the day, I'm a conduit. So I've seen people say, hey, I want to do this book, and the book they want is, was done in the 1940s, is still under copyright, and the person just had no basic idea what public domain is about. How old something needed to be, or how many times the laws have changed in order to make it really confusing. But essentially, again, what you're proving more is that things are still under copyright as opposed to proving they're in the public domain. The exception is if it's old enough. So as an example, The Great Gatsby finally went into the public domain. So any of Fitzgerald's work that is Great Gatsby or older is all in the public domain. Anything that was newer than The Great Gatsby is still under copyright. Hemingway's first collection of short stories is now in the public domain, but all of the rest of Hemingway's work is still under copyright. So
was it Hemingway that did the werewolf book? I heard something about it had an old unprinted werewolf book.
That is,
who was it?
That is
the famous American misogynist that shoots animals.
But the werewolf book you're talking about was this.
Oh God, one of the most famous writers in the world.
Yeah, the same guy who wrote Cannery Row, but right now I can't think of his name. Can somebody please type it into the chat?
I know, I'm looking at Harry, like, Harry, where are you? And we need you.
Right, it's John Steinbeck.
Steinbeck, yes. The werewolf book, oh my God, I would kill to do that.
Right, so and if something wasn't actually published and kept as a manuscript, the rules are completely different.
Oh.
And yeah, so it may have been written, but since it wasn't released into the public at that time, then you're dealing with the estate and all that. So yeah,
Yeah.
so things get complex after a while. But what you're really looking for is two things. I would both look for things in the public domain, but I would also use the IMDb, which sounds like a weird piece of advice. What you want to do is you can use the IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, to look to see movies that are coming out in the next 8 to 12 to 16 months. If there's a movie coming out that is based upon a public domain property, it behooves you to consider whether you would be the right voice to record that as a public domain book to try to coordinate that with the release.
Yeah.
As an example, when they redid the Jungle Book, I desperately went around trying to find people. No one had time. Everybody who I went to, who I was trying to get to record the Jungle Book, because I am not the right voice for the Jungle Book. But in that case, I was trying to find people and it just didn't have the time. But the idea would be, if you release the book at the right time, you're riding on the coattails of the paid promotion for
That's
the
smart.
movie property.
That's smart. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
I am aware that we are the
I know.
longest call we've ever done, but it was so fascinating and so valuable, and every single minute of it. It reminded me of that show where that guy got on and talked to like all the top actors. Do you know what I mean? Your Actors Studio, or what was it called? Late night. He always interviewed like the best actors in the world.
Oh God. Yeah. I have a vague memory
Like
of that show. I was actually thinking you were going the other
you're
way.
You're our Pacino. You're the
Aw.
audiobook world's Pacino.
Aw.
Thank you so much for your time,
Yeah.
Stephen, and for joining us and for being so generous and
Well,
for
thank
always
you.
looking after all of us.
I'm happy. I'm happy to help. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and careful, because you might never get rid of Joe. 10 years from now, we'll be like, Stephen.
Yeah, and maybe next time we'll figure out how to stay on topic. Maybe we can actually like, have a little buzzer when we go off topic.
I know we never even approached the topic today, but it doesn't matter. Pure acting knowledge and gold. So thank you so much, Stephen.
You're welcome.
Thank you everyone for joining. It's been fabulous seeing you all. Take care. Have a good week, guys. Bye, Stephen. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Come on, everybody, tap along. First you scrub a dub, then you tap and rub. You might have to yell when you hear the bell ring out loud and long. Oh, everybody scrub along and play. Tap that old time.